Alright, so we've talked about how to factor a binomial with two terms. But what if we are given a quadratic, which is a three-term polynomial, which is a trinomial? If we were given a quadratic that looks like this, x squared plus 9x plus 8. Well, you'd probably look at that and say, alright, well there's nothing that goes into, because we have imaginary 1 here, there's nothing that goes into 1, 9, and 8 besides 1, so we can't factor anything out. So the way that we factor this is we draw our little tic-tac-toe board, which I'm sure a lot of you probably played while you were in school. Hopefully not in my class. So you go ahead and you put your first term into your first box. And then you put your last term into your next box. So you have your first and last term taken care of. Then you take your middle term and you have to draw a little box down here, and our middle term goes right there into that little box. So now we've taken our middle term, put it here, our first term here, and then our last term here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to multiply across our row that we have it written down. So when we multiply, we're going to get 8 times x squared, which is 8x squared. Now, what we need to do after we multiply that is we need to think, alright, what when multiplied will give us 8x squared, but when added will give us 9x. So we have to think about that. So we have 1x times 8x, we have 2x times 4x, and those are the only terms of 8 that we have. So we go ahead and we figure out, alright, if added together, which one will give us 9x? So we go and we have found that it's 8x and 1x. So we go ahead and put our 1x here and our 8x here. So these two terms have come and gone into these boxes here. And so what we're going to do is you need to make sure that when you multiply, it gives you this number at the top. But when you add, it'll give you this number on the bottom. So we multiply and we add, try and figure out what will fit. Then we have our x squared over here. Well, the only thing that gives x squared is x times x. So we put one x here and the other x here. Again, if we were to multiply going up, it should give us that top number. Okay? So now, we want to think what times our x right here will give us this 1x over here. So what times this number here will give us that? Well, x times 1 will give us 1x. Then we go ahead and figure out, alright, what times x will give us 8x? Well, that's 8. So now we have our little tic-tac-toe board completely filled out. And what we're going to do is you have to use diagonals as your factors. So you have x plus 1 and x plus 8 as your factors. And again, if you want to use the box method or distribution to go ahead and distribute that out, you would find that it comes back into x squared plus 9x plus 8. So that's a good way to check to make sure that you did it correctly. Now let's go on to another one. Whoops. Let's go on to another one. So what if we had x squared plus 18x plus 81. I'll go ahead and draw your little tic-tac-toe board here with your little tail on the end. So it's tic-tac-toe board with a tail. And so we go ahead and we put our terms in where they're supposed to be. So we have our first term here, x squared. Then we have our last term, so first and last go together. And then our middle term has its own little place right here in the box. So then you want to multiply across the top row. So x squared times 81 is going to go ahead and give you 81x squared. Then you have to find what, when multiplied, will give you 8x squared, but when added, will give you 18x. So 81x squared is 1x times 81x. And then you also have 3x times 27x. And then you have 9x times 9x. So which one, when we add them together, so that's 82x, that's 30x, and this is 18x. So, we found that it's 9x times 9x will give you 18x. So you have your two 9x factors, and then you have your x squared, which of course is x times x, so they go here. And then what times x will give you 9x? Well, it happens to be 9 on both of them. So your factors are your diagonals. So you go ahead and you have your diagonals here. And so your two factors are x plus 9 and x plus 9. Or, if you want to get fancy, x plus 9 squared. Since both of the parentheses are the same, you can put it into a squared form, and that would be the same. Now, the reason that we added a plus in there between x and 9 is because when you go diagonal, if there's no negative signs, we always consider there's a plus in the middle there. And so we always have to add that sign when we write our factors. So, let's go ahead and try another one. So let's try t squared minus 10t plus 25. So we have our tic-tac-toe board with our tail. Tic-tac-toe with a tail. We put our t squared and then our 25. So our first and our last term. And then of course our middle term has its own little place right down there. So we go ahead and we multiply across. We get 25t squared. Then what, when multiplied, will give you 25t squared, but when added, will give you negative 10t. So we have 1 times 25, well, 1t times 25t. Then we have 5t times 5t. Well, all those are positives. So how could we multiply to get a positive, but add to get a negative? I'm sure all of you are probably sitting there going, why doesn't she just tell us? So I'm going to just tell you. You need to have both negative terms, because a negative times a negative is a positive, but a negative plus a negative is still a negative. So when you add, you have negative 26t and negative 10t. So, you have your terms. So you have negative 5t and negative 5t. Again, you want to make sure that if you were to multiply those two, it would give you the number on top. But if you were to add them, it will give you the number on the bottom. Okay? So then you have t squared over here, which gets factored into t and t. And then what times t will give you this negative 5t over here? Well, a negative 5 on both of them. So again, your factored terms are t minus 5 and t minus 5. Or if you get fancy, t minus 5 squared. This is your factored form of a trinomial. A trinomial with a 1 in front.